Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Oh, glorious to these individuals. 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 Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So we're reading from Sri Caitanya Caritamrita, Adi-lila, chapter 7, text 152 and 153. Bhikshakari Mahaprabhu Aila Vasaghara.
Bhikshakari Mahaprabhu Aila Vasaghara.
Hena Chitra Lila Kare Gauranga Sundara.
Hena Chitra Lila Kare Gauranga Sundara.
Chandra Shekhara Tapan Mishra Ara Sanatana. Shuni Deki Anadita Shabakara Mana. Bhiksha, accepting foodstuff from others. Kari, accepting. Mahaprabhu, Lord Chaitanya. Aila, returned. Vasaghara, to his residence. Hena, thus. Chitra Lila, wonderful pastimes. Kare, does. Gauranga, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sundara, very beautiful. Translation: after taking lunch among the Mayavadi sannyasis, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is known as Gaura Sundar, returned to his residence. Thus the Lord performs his wonderful pastimes. There's no purport, so text 153, Chandrasekhara. Of the name Chandrasekhara. Tapan Mishra. Of the name Tapan Mishra. Ara and Sanatana, of the name Sanatan. Shuni, hearing. Deki, seeing. Anandita, very pleased. Shabakara, all of them. Mana, minds. Translation: hearing the arguments of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and seeing his victory, Chandrasekhar, Tapan Mishra and Sanatan were all extremely pleased. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Here is an example of how a sannyasi should preach. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to Varanasi, he went there alone, not with a big party. Locally, however, he made friendships with Chandrasekhar and Tapan Mishra, and Sanatan Goswami also came to see him. Therefore, although he did not have many friends there, due to his sound preaching and his victory in arguing with the local sannyasis on Vedanta philosophy, he became greatly famous in that part of the country, as explained in the next verse. Amagyanatimanandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmanitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Ukam Karoti Bachalam Bangum Manghayate Garim Yat Kripatamaham Vande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. I was born in the darkness of ignorance. My spiritual master has very kindly come, forced open my eyes with the torchlight of transcendental knowledge. I offer my most respectful obeisances unto his lotus feet. Anyone tell me who amongst the 6 Goswamis was the son of Tapan Misra? I can give a clue. Excuse me? No, but you're getting closer. You're getting closer. Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, yes. Vishnu Jan Prabhu, thank you. Yes, I was going to give a clue that there are two of the 6 with the same first name, but yes. Yes, Raghunath, the greatly fortunate Tapan Misra was the father and his good wife, the parents of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. So, and there's a little bit about Tapan Misra here in the Caitanya Caritamrita and also in the Caitanya Bhagavatam. There's a delightful description of how Tapan Misra and his good wife met Mahaprabhu for the first time. Tapan Misra was a Brahmin and he was teaching Sanskrit in East Bengal, in villages along the river Padma. And Mahaprabhu also went there as a newly married Grihastha Brahmin to earn wealth by teaching Sanskrit. And this was in the Lord's pre-sannyas pastime stage of his life. So Tapan Misra was there in the vicinity and he was pondering what is the proper sadhana and sadhya, what is the best method of spiritual practice and what is the ultimate goal of spiritual practices. And even though he was a scholar of Sanskrit, he was musing on these deep spiritual subject matters, and he had a dream one night where a very effulgent personality appeared to him and said, tomorrow you will meet a personality who is actually the Supreme Lord, Narayan, and he will be able to answer all of your spiritual questions. So Tapan Misra woke up the next morning very excited and immediately set off to find this personality. And as described, after a short time he came across an assembly of students, in the midst of whom was Nimai Pandit, Lord Gauranga Mahaprabhu himself. And it's described that the Lord was like the full moon surrounded by beautiful stars. And he was dressed very opulently in yellow silk garments. He had Vishnu Tilak adorning his transcendental body. The Lord's hair was long at that stage, shoulder length, beautiful black, raven black curling hair, also tied as Brahmin men were accustomed to do in a top knot. And he had different sandalwood decorations on his body as well. One of his students had brought the Lord a beautiful garland. So it was a very beautiful scene, and Tapan Misra immediately approached Lord Gauranga and offered his full Dandavat obeisances. And the Lord embraced him and asked him to reveal his identity. And Tapan Misra shared with the Lord that he felt he was the most unfortunate of human beings because he could not understand or he could not ascertain the goal of life. So Mahaprabhu immediately explained to him that in different ages Krishna appears and teaches a particular spiritual path which is relevant for that time, such as in the Satya Yuga meditation on Vishnu, in the Treta Yuga gorgeous, very opulent sacrifices, yagyas, in Dwapara Yuga deity worship, again very opulent, and in Kali Yuga the Lord explained Harinam Sankirtan. So Tapan Misra immediately became a follower of Mahaprabhu, and they spent some more time together before Mahaprabhu indicated that he had to return to West Bengal And Tapa Misra and his wife both were very eager to accompany the Lord back. They didn't want to lose his association. But Mahaprabhu instructed them that no, instead you go and live in Varanasi. I'm coming there very soon, the Lord said, so we can spend some more time together there in Varanasi. And of course that is where this whole pastime is taking place, the conversion of the great Prakashananda Saraswati and his followers. And of course Mahaprabhu did in fact, after accepting the renounced order of life and moving for a short time to Jagannath Puri, but then the Lord went for 6 years travelling all over the subcontinent of India, and being the omniscient Supreme Lord, he knew that he was eventually going to come to Varanasi. So whilst there, Tapa Misra had the good fortune to feed Mahaprabhu every day. He and his good wife would invite the Lord for lunch, and Tapa Misra's wife was an excellent cook. So they took very nice care by feeding the Lord during his stay. And Mahaprabhu stayed for 2 periods of time in Varanasi, for 10 days on one occasion whilst going to Vrindavan, and for 2 months on another occasion, I think, whilst returning from his pilgrimage to Vrindavan. And it's during that 2-month time that the Lord instructed all his devotees, but especially Srila Sanatana Goswami. So, and Lord Chaitanya never forgot that kindness of Tapan Misra and his good wife, taking good care of him. So he's one of Mahaprabhu's many eternal associates who appeared to assist the Lord in his wonderful pastimes. Actually, Tapan Misra was one day hearing, when he first realized that Mahaprabhu had in fact come to Varanasi, there's a delightful description of how he was going about his daily duties, and in the distance he could hear this stupendous kirtan, literally the holy names, the Maha Mantra vibrating, and it was something a little unusual in Varanasi, because Varanasi, of course, is the seat of the impersonalist followers of Sripad Shankaracharya. So to hear such a stupendous Hari Nam Simkirtan, so he was curious, so he went searching, and he of course came across Mahaprabhu, dressed this time as a sannyasi, and he had heard that Mahaprabhu had in fact accepted the renounced order of life, and so he was very ecstatic, thinking, perhaps this is my Lord Gauranga. I've heard that he has accepted the renounced order, and sure enough, that was the case. So it's a wonderful, wonderful pastime, one of Mahaprabhu's ecstatic pastimes. And of course his son was the great Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. And a little bit like Gopal Bhatta, Raghunath was just a small boy, somewhere between the age of 5 and 10, in Varanasi when Mahaprabhu was there, and his parents greatly encouraged him to serve the Lord, which he did by massaging Mahaprabhu's lotus feet after the Lord had been dancing for hours in ecstatic kirtan, and assisting the Lord in many other ways, serving his lunch and so on. So Mahaprabhu gave wonderful instructions to the parents and also to Raghunath Bhatta. And his father actually encouraged his son when he was a little older to go and spend time with Mahaprabhu in Jagannath Puri, which he did. Raghunath Bhatta went there and spent 8 months actually in Puri. And Mahaprabhu was delighted to see him again, and he said, actually, I have 3 Raghunaths in my association, Raghunath Das Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, and there was one other devotee, Raghunath Das. So that was very wonderful, and Raghunath Bhatta was actually a very good cook himself, so he used to cook for Mahaprabhu during that time himself in Puri. And Lord Chaitanya instructed him, don't marry. But even though it was very difficult for Raghunath Bhatta to leave Mahaprabhu's association, Lord Chaitanya ordered him to go back to Varanasi and to take care of his elderly parents until they left this world, which he did. And just as Mahaprabhu had also instructed Gopal Bhatta as a young man to similarly look after his parents, Venkata Bhatta and his mother. So eventually, after his parents passed away, he returned again to Jagannath Puri for more association with Mahaprabhu, and he stayed again for a period of 8 months and served the Lord very nicely. And as he was leaving, Mahaprabhu instructed him this time, because he was not married and he didn't have any earthly responsibilities, that this time you go and stay with Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis in Vrindavan. Him a tulsi garland of Lord Jagannath's, which was not less than 10 feet long. And Mahaprabhu also took his own neck beads off his own transcendental neck and put them on the neck of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, and gave him some other nice gifts as well. So he got a lot of mercy from Mahaprabhu. And Mahaprabhu said, I shall never forget the love and affection shown by your parents. They fed me with great love. It said that Raghunath Bhatta was actually initiated by Gadadhar Pandit. And he, of course, went back to Vrindavan and became a very dear associate of the other Goswamis. And it's interesting, he's the only one of the 6 Goswamis who's not credited with any significant work of literature or installing any particular deity of Krishna, unlike the other Goswamis. In his eternal form in Goloka Vrindavan, he is Srimati Raga Manjari. In Vrindavan, because he was such a scholar, his service, he had many different services, but primarily he would read Srimad Bhagavatam to the other Goswamis for several hours every day. And he would recite the verses in 4 different melodies, much to the other Goswamis' pleasure. And it's said that his worshipable deity was in fact Srimad Bhagavatam. And he was also a very good organizer, and he had many disciples of his own. And after Srila Rupa Goswami rediscovered the deity of Govindadev and wanted to build a magnificent temple for his lordship, it was actually Raghunath Bhatta Goswami who did a lot of the organizing for the construction of that temple. And one of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami's disciples was Maharaj Man Singh, who was one of Emperor Akbar's generals in his army. This is around the year 1570. So Raghunath Bhatta, being the guru of Maharaj Man Singh, Maharaj Man Singh came, and he was a devotee. He was a very exalted personality and a kshatriya, and he was very wealthy. He'd fought many campaigns on behalf of Akbar, the emperor, and he'd been very handsomely rewarded. So he had fabulous wealth, and he wanted to do some service. So Rupa and Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, they engaged him in the construction of the magnificent 7-story Govindaji temple in Vrindavan. So he did that, and it's also said that he assisted Raghunath Das Goswami by constructing 8 steps down to both Shamakund and Radhakund when those kundas were developed by Raghunath Das Goswami. Again, Raghunath Bhatta, being a very good organizer, took responsibility for organising that. So it's a little bit about Tapan Mishra and his great son. So, of course, we find all this nectarian information here in Caitanya Caritamrita. Before we read a book, most of us like to know something about the author and what their qualifications for writing are and what their intentions were when they wrote their literatures. And in some instances we get some information, in other instances there is very little for us to relish. Vaishnava authors are always possessed with the foremost quality of dainya, which means absolute humility, sometimes translated as wretchedness. Not that great Vaishnavas are wretched, but they feel themselves in their heart of hearts wretched, that they have nothing in this world. They're hanging on to Krishna's lotus feet and the lotus feet of their gurus and the Vaishnavas. Apart from that, they feel they have nothing. But actually, they have everything. And but out of humility, profound humility, they quite often don't say much about themselves. Sanatana Goswami, in his wonderful commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam, states that self-praise is worse than death. So sometimes they say as little as, I was in household life for many years and then I became renounced. That's all they say. But others, they do reveal something about themselves, and also their disciples often know something of their life and their history. So in the case of Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, who is the author of this wonderful literature, of course we do have a little information which he shares with his readers. We've already read that in, I think, the 5th chapter of this Adi-lila, where Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami shares with us something of his early life and an epiphany moment in his life which prompted him to leave Bengal and move to Vrindavan, just as Mahaprabhu instructed Raghunath Bhatta. So what transpired was that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami had organized one kirtan evening at his home, and he'd invited all the local Vaishnavas to come, and the VIP, the guest of honor, was Mini Kaitan Ramdas, who is one of the Dwadasa Gopals, or the 12 eternal cowherd boyfriends of Krishna and Balaram in Goloka Vrindavan. So he took birth along with innumerable other associates of their lordships. It's said that Mahaprabhu, when he instructed Lord Nityananda, whose appearance day is only, I think, slightly less than 2 weeks away, very exciting outdoor festival. But when Mahaprabhu instructed Lord Nityananda, you please go back to Bengal and preach there, deliver all of our fellow countrymen, and I'm giving you these 12 devotees to go with you. And they are the 12 eternal cowherd boys from Goloka Vrindavan. They were all greatly exalted personalities and very qualified. Some were fantastic kirtan leaders, others were great preachers. And Mini Caitanya Ramdas, he was one of those personalities. And so he came to that evening program at the home of Krishnadas. Later on, he received the honorific title Kaviraj, King of Poets. But at that time, that was his spiritual name. So it's said that Krishnadas Kaviraj's brother had great faith in Lord Chaitanya, but he didn't have the same degree of faith in Lord Nityananda. And he may have mentioned something to that effect to Mini Caitanya Ramdas, who was Lord Nityananda's great devotee. So Mini Caitanya Ramdas became very upset and he left that program prematurely. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was very upset with his brother. It was a great offence. The VIP had been disrespected. So he severely chastised his brother. And that night, in a dream, Lord Nityananda appeared to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. And it was the most wonderful dream any devotee could ever imagine. Nityananda Prabhu was gorgeously dressed in blue silks. He was carrying a rod, a metal rod, red colour encrusted with jewels. There were bumblebees hovering about the Lord's garland. It was gorgeously decorated. And he was surrounded by cowherd boys, and the Lord was murmuring in a very grave and deep voice, Krishna, Krishna. And similarly, the cowherd boys were all responding around him. So Nityananda Prabhu, he instructed Krishnadas, you immediately leave here and go to Vrindavan. There you will attain all good things. So this was the wonderful personal darshan which Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami had with Lord Nityananda, and of course which precipitated his leaving Bengal, and there's no indication that he ever returned, that he spent the rest of his life in Vrindavan. And of course, the first book he wrote, Govinda Lilamrita. And it was as a result of writing that book that his fellow Goswamis, after they read that wonderful work, honoured him with the title Kaviraj, King of Poets. And then sometime after that, as one by one, the exalted personalities, Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu and others at Vaitracharya began to leave this world. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, who was a great scholar and a great devotee and loved by all the assembled devotees in Sri Vrindavan Dham, was requested to write this magnus opus, Sri Caitanya Caritamrita. And of course, it said that it took him some time to complete that. And devotee writers never try to outdo the predecessor acharyas, and already by that time Vrindavan Das Thakur had written his Chaitanya Bhagavat. Lochan Das Thakur and Vrindavan Das Thakur both wrote biographies on Mahaprabhu around the same time, unbeknownst to one another. And they both titled their book Chaitanya Mangala. But Vrindavan Das Thakur, he agreed to change the title of his book out of respect for Lochan Das Thakur to Chaitanya Bhagavat. Murari Gupta had also written about the Lord's early life in Navadvip, which he personally witnessed, as had the Lord's secretary in Puri, whose name is Swarup Damodar. Thank you, Mataji. Swarup Damodar had also kept a diary, and most importantly, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami had heard from Raghunath Das Goswami at Radhakund every afternoon for several hours, because Raghunath Das Goswami was personally present there in Puri and had witnessed many of these extraordinary pastimes of Mahaprabhu. And what he didn't witness himself personally, he heard from Swarup Damodar Goswami, who was his Shiksha Guru. We know when Raghunath Das Goswami finally managed to leave home and take shelter of Mahaprabhu, Mahaprabhu immediately entrusted him to the care of Swarup Damodar Goswami. And he is known as the Raghunath of Swarup. So in this way, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami had heard very attentively for a long period of time from Raghunath Das Goswami. So then he was requested by the assembled devotees, you please write down more information. So very wonderfully he does that, but in many instances he only gives a very brief description of the pastimes, because he states very clearly there that Vrindavan Das Thakur, who is known as the Vyasa of Caitanya Lila, the Srila Vyasadeva Mahaprabhu's pastimes, he has already discussed this. But there were many pastimes, especially the later pastimes, which Vrindavan Das Thakur had not fully spoken or written about. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he expands on those very wonderfully. So in that way we get some wonderful idea as to the author, which is fascinating. And of course, Vaishnava authors, they don't dare. They must have already have achieved some very, very high status of devotional realizations before they even dare write something about the Lord and his pastimes. And they're always very respectful to the predecessor acharyas. So, and of course Srila Prabhupada followed that wonderful tradition. Actually, I heard a story recently. Bhaktadas Prabhu, who was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, served as a temple president in some of the smaller temples in California in the early 70s. And he recalled on one occasion, may have been San Diego, Laguna Beach, one of those smaller temples. Prabhupada kindly came there for a few days, and one evening Prabhupada gave an informal darshan to the devotees and guests. Anyone could ask questions and Prabhupada would answer. So there was one guest. He wasn't living in the temple, but he was a member of the congregation. He used to come to the Sunday feasts and so on. But he asked Srila Prabhupada, I have read all of your books. Who is your spiritual master? And Prabhupada just looked at this young man, and the devotees looked at this young man. And Prabhupada said, you say that you have read all of my books and you do not know who is my spiritual master? And Prabhupada said, next question. Because if this young man had in fact read all of Srila Prabhupada's books, he would well know, because it's inescapable. In any book, any literature, you have, first of all, in Sanskrit spiritual text, you have what's known as Mangala Charanam. Mangalacharana means auspicious invocation, where the writer will invoke auspiciousness from his predecessor acharyas and gurus and the Supreme Lord, his Ishtadev, worshipable deity of Krishna. And he will also invoke auspiciousness from his readers. He hopes that what he has written will give pleasure to his readers. It's sometimes said that some of the great works of the Goswamis they wrote and gave to their fellow Goswamis as a token of love. They had no idea that 400 or 500 years later, those same works would be printed in mass and distributed all over the world. It was a simple offering of love from one great devotee to another. So, and of course you have introductions, forwards, prefaces, and then you have concluding statements when the book is finished. So it's not possible to go through Srila Prabhupada's books and in all of those different places and in the texts, or at least in the purports, Srila Prabhupada often quotes, "In this regard, my spiritual master, Sri Srimad," and often he uses the full honorific title, 108 Tridandi Goswami Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada states. So Prabhupada dismissed that question because that is how the family business goes on, which is described. The family business of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas is translating, publishing, and distributing transcendental literature. So this is our glorious tradition, and of course we delight in Prabhupada's wonderful presentation of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. I also came across, just to end on a lighter note, but Prabhupada's wonderful use of language. Yes, English was not Srila Prabhupada's first mother tongue, but Prabhupada knew English extremely well. And he also, it's delightful how Prabhupada could sometimes combine an English word with a Bengali word for greater emphasis. And I came across a couple the other day I hadn't heard lately. Humbugism and Gundaism. I was really charmed by that one. I think maybe some of our knew it about. A Gunda in Bengali is basically a criminal, a dacoit. So Prabhupada, so Gundaism, basically the society. Of course, Prabhupada used this word ism. Socialism, capitalism, communism, materialism. So he was very fond of, and of course we know in Vaishnav, all these are temporary designations on the body which we identify with, but actually they don't have any relevance to the soul. So the society of gundas or dacoits, criminals, and humbug, I think another old English word. So anything which is basically just concocted nonsense, humbugism. So I've also been wanting for some time to tell some Vyasa-san, Prabhupada Vyasa-san stories. Can I tell a few and we'll finish that? Is that all right? Okay, 1970, Paris. Hari Vilas Prabhu was the temple president. He recalls this. The devotees had arranged a speaking engagement for Prabhupada at one of the big universities in Paris. There were 2,000 students there when Prabhupada arrived. Prabhupada took the devotees, as was the custom, had brought Prabhupada's Vyasa-san from the temple and established a big Vyasa-san right on the stage. So Prabhupada arrived and took his seat on the Vyasasana and was about to lecture. There'd been kirtan, was about to speak. And there was a group of French students and they were shouting something. And Mondakini Devi Dasi was going to be Prabhupada's translator. So Prabhupada asked her, what are they saying? And she said, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, they want you to sit on the floor. So Prabhupada thought for a moment, then his voice boomed out across the loudspeaker system. This seat is reserved for the representative of Srila Vyasadeva, the compiler and editor of all the Vedic scriptures. Anyone who is qualified can sit on this seat. But if you can hear me better, if I sit on the floor, then I will sit on the floor. And there was pin drop silence, and Prabhupada proceeded with his lecture. So that's one story. Another story, very important press conference. I think it was 1976, and it was either in New York or Los Angeles. And I think it may have been New York, because the highly successful first ever Rath Yatra down Fifth Avenue in New York had just been held. It was wonderfully covered by all the big news organisations of North America. It had gone all over the country. So it was big news. And of course that was the city, as we all know only too well, where Srila Prabhupada started the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So the media were clamouring to interview the world leader, His Divine Grace. So a press conference was arranged in the temple, and nice seating was set up for all the reporters and the television crews. All they had their cameras set up, there were lights and everything. So Prabhupada, and it was in the temple room, and Prabhupada came in and he very humbly sat on a cushion. And one of the reporters immediately asked, Your Grace, why aren't you sitting on your big seat? And Prabhupada said, because you're all envious, I'm sitting on the floor. And they all laughed. All the reporters laughed. They all thought, yes, yeah, it's a fact, we are envious. So they took that over, they wrote that down. So Prabhupada, so that was humorous. And on a similar note, another story, Vyasasana story I heard not so long ago. August in North America is the hottest, most humid month. So Prabhupada was attending whichever temple it was, in one of the suburbs of one of the great cities of North America. Could have been Chicago, Detroit, wherever. But it was a very hot evening, and the devotees had invited Srila Prabhupada again. They brought Prabhupada's Vyasasana out onto the front lawn of this temple in the suburbs of one of the cities of North America. And Prabhupada was sitting there on his Vyasasana. There was a devotee on either side, one with peacock fan, another with chamara fanning Prabhupada. All the devotees were sitting there ecstatically around Prabhupada's lotus feet. And of course the local people, it was a well-to-do suburb, local people are coming and going on their evening walks or coming home, whatever. So people were coming about and seeing this delightful scene. But one local man, he was having a tough time digesting all of this. So he came right into the assembly of the devotees, and he asked one of the devotee men, why are you fanning? Well, actually he asked Prabhupada. He came in and he interrupted Prabhupada speaking, and he was quite disturbed, a little agitated. He said, why are these boys fanning you? And Prabhupada looked at him and said, because it's hot. And the man just shook his head and sort of wandered back home. So some Vyasasana pastimes there. Yes. All right, so we're right on time. I'll stop there, and if anyone has a question or a comment. Hare Krishna, Jai Vaishnavi. Yes.
Thank you for the class.
Hare Krishna.
I was wondering about the Tulsi garden. It seems that we are allowed to be a Maha Tulsi garden. Is that correct?
We are, sorry?
Allowed to be a Maha Tulsi garden?
I think so.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. It was Lord Jagannath's, yeah, it's described, it was 7 yards long, or 10 feet, yeah. And also some of Lord Jagannath's beetle, Mahaprasadam, was also given to Raghunath. But, yeah, it's said that Raghunath in Chaitanya Bhagavatam is actually described that he would wear that garland. Yeah, perhaps not all the time. I think when he was reciting Srimad Bhagavatam, he would wear that. He was accustomed to wear. Mahaprabhu gave it to him and he took it off to Vrindavan. So that's anyone else? Yeah. Sure.
Just the point about you mentioned that the devotees always humble, and even though they're scholars, they don't present themselves as great. They always give credit to the previous acharyas. And it's an interesting point because we also see that, like in our modern day, we have the sannyasis and they are presented with the biography. So it's not that they're taking credit, but they also want to present it to the public that they have some credentials, but they're not thinking themselves that they qualify. They're just seeing themselves as servant of Prabhupada and the previous acharyas. So they're teaching us how externally it may seem that they are presenting themselves as qualified, but there's an internal mood, and the purpose is to share Krishna consciousness with others.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Nice. Anything else? Jai Ho. Oh, Prabhu Das. Yeah.
In regard to Prabhupada used the language, I was thinking about one word, democracy.
Yes.
We call it demon crazy. And the other one, Prabhupada used the word devotee. Whereas, as we know, the proper pronunciation is devotee. So Prabhupada has created a different word in a sense. But it's much nicer when we hear devotee. We're used to hearing that, but other people might feel strange when they hear that. And there's another Vyasa story, I wish I could remember now. One time the devotees, they got this huge asana, Prabhupada took it to an event. Prabhupada just looked at it, just saying, this was just too much. And the huge asana. We should probably, remember that one?
Not sure. I might have vaguely heard that, yes. Yeah.
And that's one thing I was thinking about when you mentioned Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taking sannyas. And how extreme that was at the time. It was socially, there was an obligation for a son to look after the mother. Now, the father had passed away. So Satyadevi was just at the mercy of who or what. So I just wondered if you had any comment about that.
Yes. Yeah, it was extreme. There is a verse, I've never committed it to memory, but it's actually there in the Ramayana. It's a very famous verse which our acharyas often where it describes that Lord Ramachandra also went into the forest, as we know he did, on the order of his father, to deliver the fallen souls. And that same verse can be applied to Mahaprabhu, who gave up household life to go into the forest to deliver the fallen souls of the age of Kali. So, of course, the Lord's eternal associates who did stay with him in Navadvip rallied around Sachimata. And Mahaprabhu had many wealthy followers who assisted Sachimata, and of course the Lord's widows. Lakki Priya was the first wife of Mahaprabhu. She passed away while the Lord was actually in East Bengal, and then on the order of his mother, Mahaprabhu remarried Vishnupriya, and Vishnupriya was very young when the Lord accepted sannyas. So both Vishnupriya and Sachimata were maintained. Very nice. And actually it was Chandrasekhar whose wife was the sister of Sachimata. I think I got that right. And so for some time there, and Sachimata had one servant, Ishan, who was very devoted to them, and there were many other personalities in Navadvip who rallied around Sachi. But still, unthinkable heartache for Mother Sachi. She'd already lost, I think, 8 daughters, her and Jagannath Mishra. And then her oldest son, Vishwarup, had left home. As soon as he got wind that his parents wanted him to get married, he left and took sannyas, and then Lord Chaitanya. So sometimes it appears heartbreaking. Krishna comes and then he leaves again. Sometimes it's described that's to increase the intensity of feelings. That's the whole essence of Mahaprabhu's, or one of the great pillars of Mahaprabhu's teachings, which is Vipralamba Seva or Vipralamba Bhava, service to Krishna even in separation. So I hope that's something. Hare Krishna. All right, the bell has tolled, everyone. Kitri waits. Jai Shri Chaitanya Caritamrita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.